Hello and welcome to Heartland Urbanist. I'm Matt Caffrey. I'm a dad, an organizer, and an urbanist from Columbus, Ohio. For this video, we'll be joined by my friend and Heartland Urbanist collaborator, Sten Heinze. Hi, Sten.
Hi, Matt. I'm a chemist and computer scientist in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also interested in the urban topics.
Awesome. Let's dive in. So, Sten, today we wanted to talk about density housing zoning, partially motivated by the ongoing process to reform the zoning code here in Columbus called Zone in Columbus. When you hear the mayor or other people within the city talking about the Zone in Columbus project, they almost always speak about transit within the same breath. So in a way, this is a continuation of our conversation about Columbus's transit plan, Link Us. We thought we'd start by each sharing a story from our own neighborhoods that dramatize the need for zoning reform. So do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So recently I was at a Clintonville neighborhood meeting where somebody applied for a zoning variance because they wanted to build an infill duplex and carriage house on an empty lot. And with the help of an architect, they designed the plans so that the proposed house would look like the other houses in the neighborhood and fit in very well. And, matching the neighborhood, including the style and the setback and everything, that basically you wouldn't be able to tell this is a new house. However, though, because the zoning in Columbus was set after the neighborhood was built, it's basically now impossible to build in the same way without asking for variances. So unfortunately, in this meeting, a big enough group of neighbors opposed the variances, and the Clintonville Area Commission was not going to recommend the zoning variance to pass. So ultimately, the owner asked the area commission to table this. And in my sense, from a brief conversation afterwards, is that this project is not going to build this way now, which is somewhat frustrating, but it also highlights several issues in this. For one, the argument that the meeting attendees used, ranging from there's too much traffic to not enough parking to crime will go up, none of which were based on actual neighborhood data. It seems they were all based on feelings. The second thing is the blanket imposing of zoning on the existing neighborhoods, like it happened in this case, is having much more consequence than just separating land uses that zoning code was originally designed to do. Like in this case, it makes it basically impossible to build even just an infill so that you can increase the neighborhood density somewhat. And based on the demand for the houses in the neighborhood, this more dense neighborhood is actually very desirable. So you would want to live, or lots of people are going to want to live there. And the consequence of all of this is that we'll have more low density suburban sprawl that is going to be built. And this not only does create traffic through this neighborhood when people go from their suburban homes to downtown, for example, to work or to go to restaurants, but also it decreases the tax base that the city of Columbus has available to support and fund their projects. Or if they alternatively still want to fund this project, they have to increase the taxes. So ultimately, there's no good side to this except that it keeps the status quo.
Thank you for sharing that, Sten. I want to share another story from my neighborhood, a story about a former Giant Eagle grocery store site on the south side of Columbus, just outside of German Village, called Jaeger Square. So here's the story. A few blocks north of my home, there used to be a Giant Eagle grocery store. It was small and sort of run down and had a sort of giant suburban style parking lot surrounding it in one of the densest neighborhoods in the city. The store was originally opened in the 1950s, but closed in 2020. Before it closed, a developer, which actually owns the land, proposed building a 330 unit mixed use 5-story project on the 2.3-acre site. After there was a lot of initial pushback from neighbors, the plans were scaled down to 262 units. And that plan was approved by the Southside Commission and the City Council. But the fight went through a lawsuit that wealthy neighbors filed to try to block the project. The case was finally dismissed in February of 2022, and the project called Jaeger Square is now slated to be finished in 2024. Part of the reason that the fight was so drawn out and expensive is that, similar to the carriage house and duplex in Clintonville, the plan required significant zoning variances. It's mixed use, it's built at a human scale without a massive setback, and trigger warning, it only requires 1 parking spot per unit. Oh no. And now needing a variance for these things in such a neighborhood is really silly. That's the nature of all of the homes and businesses in the neighborhood. It's less than a mile from downtown. It's on a major bus line. This is exactly the kind of neighborhood in which you would want density. But the current zoning code doesn't have any regard for neighborhood context. And that gives neighbors who are opposed to development a lot of different opportunities to apply pressure to try to block or shrink projects like this. Now, in your example, they were able to block the project. In my example, they just shrunk it. In either case, the current zoning law requires a lot of one-off decisions to be made about specific projects, especially if the project involves density. And it doesn't acknowledge that local context as we were talking about. So a suburban strip mall and an urban coffee shop face the same basic parking requirements. And then, of course, having a complex web of multiple decision makers is another way that opponents to these developments can slow down and harm these projects. I also want to take a moment to talk about neighborhood character. In my example, many of the residents were most upset that the building would be too large and tall to fit with the neighborhood. But it has been my experience that neighborhoods aren't as fragile as these folks seem to think. When I lived in Washington, D.C., a lot of new housing was added over the years that I lived there. Not only did the neighborhood character not change, it was strengthened because people were choosing to move into the neighborhood to seek the sort of walkable, dense environment that I loved about our neighborhood. I think in a lot of cases, the neighborhood character concern is really code for other concerns like racism or elitism. In the end, neighborhoods change inevitably. If folks are concerned about their neighborhood's character, they should work to build community to help shape it. So Jaeger Square is exactly the kind of urban infill development that the city needs to become denser, more livable, more walkable, less car dependent, and to find room for the hundreds of thousands or over 1 million new residents that are expected to move to Columbus by 2050. They can either move to dense walkable communities like the South Side or Clintonville, or they can move to suburban subdivisions, adding to our city's challenges with sprawl and car dependency. So I beg my neighbors to think about which of those options they actually would prefer. So Sten, I think next what we should do is we should talk about some specific considerations that the city should take as they're going through the zoning reform process. And one that I want to start with is one that the mayor was speaking about in his recent State of the City. Up to this point, we have had affordable housing requirements when a company receives a tax abatement. But they haven't been very stringent. They've been pretty minimal. Many other cities require affordable units as part of every development. To me, it seems like that is a really critical part. What do you think about that?
Well, I have lots of thoughts about that. Generally, data suggests that if you have mixed neighborhoods,
Yep.
that these neighborhoods do better than just having a very poor neighborhood and a very rich neighborhood. Just economically, there is not too much incentive for a builder to build that unless there is an incentive from the city. For the city to have some incentive like that or some requirement like that, that is going to be essential to build more of those spaces that are mixed. I would almost say, given that Columbus is growing, it's important to build almost everything. Like you could build mixed low-income housing, but you could also build the infill in Clintonville that's not really going to be low income.
One of the points I wanted to add to the conversation is that I think often zoning reform can be perceived as a giveaway to the big developers. And Columbus, I think, could be rightly critiqued for being a city that it's very like where the local leadership is very cozy with the developers. It would be helpful to include higher expectations for developers as part of sort of a signal to voters that this is not just a handout to the big developers, that we are both making it easier to develop housing in the city, but we are also asking more of those developers. This requirement is a really important point of making this a politically palatable package for the voters of the city.
Yes, I agree. I think there is a good argument to be made for like general rules that benefit Columbus or even society in general.
Great. So then the last area that I think would be good to discuss is the legacy of redlining in Columbus and sort of the broader question of racial justice as it intersects with housing. Obviously, this is still an issue that haunts Columbus. Columbus is a fairly segregated city.
What is not going to help is if we make neighborhoods better in quotation marks by pushing out the existing people that live in those neighborhoods. Improve it with them and not basically against them.
It does seem like the city is centering those concerns within this process. It is so clear, and I'm very glad that the city sees that it's clear. There's this interconnection between transit and affordable housing and density. They all sort of have implications for racial justice in the city.
Do you have anywhere people could go and look up what to do and where they can find more information about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to learn more or show your support for the zoning reform process in Columbus, you can go to columbus.gov/zoning code update. And I'll add a link to the description of the video. Okay, wow, that was a lot. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and are taking away some interesting ideas that you can chew on. Let us know your thoughts in the comments or on Mastodon, where I'm at mattcaff@union.place and Sten is at sten@urbanist.social. We'd love to hear your ideas for future videos. If you enjoyed the video, let us know by liking it, and please subscribe so you're notified about future videos. Heartland Urbanist is also available on urbanists.video, a community-driven YouTube alternative. We post all of our videos there 1 week before we post them to YouTube, and it's both free and ad-free. So go check us out over at urbanists.video. I'll add a link to the description. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.